are you to do anything that's going to give Mr. Trump a pretext to engage in unilateral military action?
All right, folks, we back at it, man. I went and got Pierre again. We got some questions for my man. A lot of hot stuff going on. Mike Glover dropped a video the other day about how the cartels bought a bunch of bullets, 180,000 bullets, and he feels like that's the first wave of attack. He thinks they're going to be used to link up belt-fed ammunition. I got Pierre on. Pierre has a completely different take. What do you got today, Pierre?
Hello. Well, yes. Thank you for having me back. Look, I'm very surprised by how informed much of the quote-unquote narco-related discussions taking place on social media truly are. I mean, some of it's just getting silly. And unfortunately, the gentleman that you're referring to, the other podcast host, this is a clear illustration of simply how the American people, and in particular, social commentators on social media and conventional media, simply do not understand just how profoundly they are misapprehending the situation. And when you fail to understand your adversary, it's going to undermine your ability to anticipate what they're going to do next. I was on another podcast, and I remember the host at one point was like, well, Americans, we don't give a fuck what they think about themselves. Well, you better take the time to understand how they perceive themselves, because that's what controls their conduct. And so in this particular circumstance, you're talking about a large amount of ammunition being discovered. The Mexican cartels, and first of all, let's just qualify one thing. There are currently 2 transnational criminal organizations in Mexico. Those are what are conventionally referred to as the major cartels. You have Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation. In addition to those 2, there are 7 regional cartels. So you have a total of 9. Now, what most Americans don't appreciate, and Mr. Trump, to his credit, shortly after he took office, he's the first president to ever publicly acknowledge that there is collusion between key elements of the Mexican government and the drug cartels. Now, this has been common knowledge throughout the trafficking world for decades. Most Americans, however, didn't understand just how institutionalized those corruption networks extend. And so that's the first rebuttal point, because what the current cartel paradigm had its birth in the 1970s. Well, it was literally created by the Mexican military at the behest of key elements of the political class. They wanted to be able to profit off of the drug trade, not get involved themselves. They wanted to profit. So they created a system called the plaza. And the plaza is a term in Spanish referring to a geographical area. And so you'll have a number of groups operating in different plazas. The Mexican government doesn't care what group controls a plaza. They just want their cut. So when we see the fighting going on in Mexico, it's groups of criminals fighting for who's going to control that plaza. The people who never leave are the key elements of the Mexican military, political, and law enforcement elite. And so you can rest assured that every one of those individuals at the political level who are invested in this system, going back over 50 years now, have reached out to their cartel contacts and said, under no circumstances are you to do anything that's going to give Mr. Trump a pretext to engage in unilateral military action over the objection of the Mexican government. So
and that's what we're seeing right now, right? Like, he's pissed. He's starting to squeeze the government part of Mexico because they're not doing a good enough job.
Yeah.
So
well, I was going to say, look, the Mexican government is involved in a very delicate dance where they're trying to do the absolute minimum they can to appease Mr. Trump while not disrupting the system. So when they've effectively shut down the border for migrant crossing. That was a key element of Mr. Trump's campaign. They delivered on that. I just saw a statistic yesterday that year over year, the amount of migrant crossings has plummeted 95%. So that creates the appearance that they're working with us.
Yep.
They've also shut down the overland importation routes being used by the non-cartel organizations. But it creates the appearance that they're working with us. They put 10,000 troops on the border. They create the appearance it works for us. So now Mr. Trump, of course, knows it's all bullshit. It's a dog and pony show. Now, he'll bank those concessions. He'll take the migrant shutdown. He'll take the overland importation route shutdown. But he knows that they're playing this game. So he's trying to maneuver them into an untenable position. Meanwhile, the Mexican government is saying, no, we're not going to participate essentially any further, which is why just 10 days ago, Trump asked the Mexican president for permission to allow Mexican troops to engage in direct action on their soil. The Mexican government said no. Well, in the absence of some form of provocation, Trump's going to be very bad. Like, he can't just unilaterally start bombing after they've been cooperating with us.
Yep.
So you know that the cartel leaders have been told by their handlers in the government, and I don't mean to suggest the entire government's corrupt, but there are elements which are corrupt. Those people have advised their cartel contacts, do not give Mr. Trump a pretext. So this notion that they're going to start shooting up Colorado or shooting up Arizona is absurd. That's exactly what would give Mr. Trump the pretext to go in over the Mexican government's objections.
So how does let me ask you this. I know we talked about this in one of our earlier podcasts about how the money really doesn't leave the United States. It gets washed in the United States. China's helping them wash it. How, like with bullets, it just surprised me that, and obviously I know they like to work away from the border because there's a lot less eyes on them. Mm-hmm. But the other thing I said was, I know they got pulled over by 2 policemen, but my guess is there was a DEA guy involved. Someone was following them. They knew what was going on and they pegged them. But like you said this before, like they're counting on numbers. So what's the flow of materials and goods? What's it look like from the United States back to Mexico? Do you think these bullets were headed back to Mexico?
Unquestionably.
Okay.
Yes, we discussed earlier, and now common knowledge that the paramilitary wing of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel is being led by a group of former United States Special Forces.
Correct.
Those men are anticipating, in the event the protection market breaks down, because right now it's holding, in the event the protection market breaks down and their inability to run and hide is compromised, then and only then will they have to retaliate.
Okay, so real quick, let's talk about what is the protection market?
Well, the protection market is, initially it was the plaza system, but in particular, for the first 17 years, the modern cartel era was born in 1989. And so the first full year of the Sinaloa cartel's operations is 1990. And just so the audience knows, there's 9 cartels. We usually just speak about Sinaloa because that's the one familiar to most of the people in the United States.
Gotcha.
The first full year of Sinaloa's operations was 1990. For the first 17 years, their bread and butter was the importation and transportation of cocaine. In 2007, the then Bush administration persuaded the conservative government in Mexico to go along and adopting what's essentially called a decapitation strategy. This was what was being used in Iraq the year before very successfully, taking out Zarqawi and a bunch of other scumbags. Well, they wanted to bring that same strategy to Mexico. They rechristened it the Kingpin strategy to make it a little bit more palatable. Well, The Kingpin strategy ultimately failed because had we been partnering with Norway or Switzerland or any Western European country, their law enforcement institutions aren't corrupt. Whereas in Mexico, literally, the man, Genaro Luna, that was their FBI director, their equivalent of an FBI director, he got paid $50 million. Their Secretary of Defense, Cienfuegos, got paid $60 million. Their DEA chief, Ramirez, got paid $30 million. You have 3 officials alone split $140 million.
Hey, for big dollars, bro. They ain't playing around with little change.
No, it gets worse. The corruption network that Genaro Luna brought to the table. Remember, he was their FBI director. He had 10 fellow associates. This is the elite of the Mexican federal law enforcement established. There were, between Genaro Luna and those 10 other men, that 11-man cabal received $450 million. Well, these are the men that our Attorney General, Alberto Gonzalez, was partnering with, that my old prosecutor, FBI Director Mueller, was working with, that G.W. Bush was working with. Well, when you rely upon political officials that are corrupt, obviously the goals you intend to achieve aren't going to be met. Yep. And so you're collaborating with them. They found a way how to monetize their political influence. See, people like to say that the cartel is bribing the Mexican politicians. That's not true.
Yep.
The politicians are extracting exorbitant rents.
Yep.
They handed over $540 million to 13 political legal officials in one administration. And those are the guys that coordinated. And so every one of the undertakings, that was the creation of the protection market in 2007. And from that point forward, every operation was compromised. You realize that the American government spent $4.5 billion. The Mexican government undertook 5 military campaigns. They mobilized 65,000 soldiers, and they launched attacks into Operation Michoacan, Operation Baja. They went into Tamaulipas twice. They went into Juarez. Well, you know who didn't get an operation? Sinaloa, because they paid the $540.
Yeah.
And so the entire time, you got Genaro Luna coming to the United States. The president is praising the man. This is his strength, his courage, his honor, his integrity. Finally, we have a true partner on the war on drugs. I got paid $50 million. Every time they left D.C., they picked up the phone, called their handlers, and Sinaloa said, "You're not, this is what the gringos are doing next." So every operation was compromised.
So you basically just think that all them bullets was headed back new generation. Everybody's starting to get ready for should things break down. But I would have to imagine like 180 rounds is nothing, right? 180,000 rounds is nothing. I can remember going to training events with 4 million rounds with 2 platoons, 32 shooters, 4 million rounds of bullets, right? So are there a couple other pipelines for them to get ammunition? Because I got to believe like Brazil is selling ammunition.
There was a leak several years ago in Mexico on like the Spanish language version of WikiLeaks called the Guacamole leaks. It detailed how the Mexican military was aware of the fact that there were units within the Mexican military that were supplying various cartel paramilitary wings with weapons, with munitions. A lot of munitions are coming out of Guatemala. A lot of them are coming out of Honduras because all of these countries utilize American platforms.
Yep.
And so the same thing with the Mexican, their special forces come here to, they get trained at Bragg. And so when they get recruited into the paramilitary wing, those are the systems that they use. And so since there's so many corrupt little countries in Central America, they just start buying it up from them. And of course, look, one of the advantages the cartel paramilitary wings have over the Taliban, for instance, is the cartel wings are situated right next to the largest non-state civilian armory in the world, Texas.
Yep.
Throughout the Southwest, there are teams that are just going around securing weapons. When you look at those photos on social media of, 400 Jalisco paramilitary guys, and they're all holding 50 cal rifles, those are $2,500 a piece. In Texas, they go for $10,000 a piece in Mexico. Yep. And if the Texans really greedy, they'll trade product for it.
Yep. We're going to talk about that in the next one, though, Pierre. I appreciate it, man. Damn, man. Like, you just got so much insight into, like, the small bits of it. It just kind of changes how you thinking about the whole game. Man, it's always good, Pierre. I appreciate it, brother.